So in this video, we're going to talk about choosing materials for a receptive skills lesson. You're probably familiar with the idea that we have authentic materials and non-authentic materials and something maybe in the middle. Authentic materials are the ones that were created for the general public who speaks this language. They're not intended for people to study with. And then we have at the bottom there, you have created materials or non-authentic materials. Those are like textbooks generally, or I just put the British Council Learn English site. They have a lot of listening materials. And those are materials that were created specifically for learning English. And then we have some things in the middle. Those are usually authentic materials that were adapted for the purpose of learning English. All of those types of materials have pros and cons for teachers and for students. Authentic materials can be very motivating. It feels great to understand something that native speakers are interested in, to understand something real. But they can be very challenging. They're not always an appropriate level. And then with created materials like textbooks, they're practical for teachers. They're there, ready to use, maybe at your student's level already. But honestly, they can be kind of boring. It's like, who cares what John did at the store? If you're a Ministry of Education teacher here in Ecuador, you've probably been working with the new modules or looking at the new module. So we're going to look a little later at some examples, but everything we're doing in this workshop is relevant for teaching, listening, or reading with the text and audio from the ministry digital modules. You probably want to use some authentic materials too. You'll have to find those yourself. But whatever type you choose, and I suggest you use all three of those, whatever type of materials you use, you are going to decide which texts and which audios to focus a whole lesson on. Because let's be real, there are always some texts or some audios that we assign as homework, that we just use quickly as an introduction for something else, that it's a review, or that we just skip. So you choose which ones are appropriate for a whole lesson. And for the purpose of this workshop, we're talking about using a whole lesson to focus on reading or to focus on listening. If I'm going to focus a whole lesson on a receptive skill, on listening or reading, it should help students to develop and improve their listening skills or their reading skills, not just test what they already understand. We're called teachers. We're not called testers. So our job here is to help students develop those skills and get better, not just to find out what they already can do right now. So that means that ideally, the text or the audio is going to be just above students' current comprehension level. Because if it's exactly at or below what they already understand, then they don't have an opportunity to get better. So that means we want a text or audio that students are not able to understand or are not able to understand well the first time they hear it or the first time they read it. But with the help, with the support of the activities in the lesson, then they can understand it or understand more of it. So for the type of lesson that we're going to work with in this workshop, you want to choose a text or an audio that there is enough time in the lesson and a need by the students to listen to it 3 times or more, or to read it 3 times or more. So we're going to consider both the length of the audio or the text and also the complexity and difficulty. When I say there is time, if your audio is 12 minutes long, you will not have time to repeat it multiple times in class. So that's not going to work. But also, I mentioned need to repeat it. If students understand the audio perfectly the first time you play it, then they don't need a whole lesson about it. If there's nothing more for them to understand with a repetition, they don't need this whole lesson. You could use it in a different way, but it doesn't need this kind of lesson. If your class is about 40 to 60 minutes long, we would recommend an audio of about 3 to 5 minutes. And if it's for a reading lesson, something that takes about 3 to 5 minutes to read, the length of the text will depend on what type of text it is, how dense, how complex. A couple more things to consider when you're choosing the text or the audio. Keep in mind, there is no perfect text. There is no perfect song or perfect news report, perfect video. Don't waste your time trying to find the perfect materials. Instead, choose something and try it and find out what happens and experiment. It's probably going to work well for some of your students and not so well for other students, and then you can try something different next week. And also keep in mind that the difficulty level and also how interesting it is for students, it depends on the activities you give them to do, not only the materials you choose. And my last suggestion, watch out for audio or a reading that is too easy for your students. I notice a lot of teachers are worried this will be too hard. And I agree. If it's really way above the student's level, that can be very discouraging and frustrating for them. So I understand that concern. But also, if you choose something that's really below the student's level or below it at all, that's also discouraging. It's boring. That's not motivating. That can be frustrating too. So keep in mind, we want to be just a little above their level. Experiment with it. But don't be scared to try something difficult. So I hope those suggestions help you choose materials for the lesson that you're going to plan with us during this workshop series.